Well, thank you all so much for joining us. For this is Karine Bell's session. It will be on a process of exploring developmental trauma, shame, and anti-racism work, which I'm super excited for. And I'm going to read Karine's bio. Karine Bell is a somatic teacher and abolitionist dedicated to embodied trauma alchemy. She is also a culturally reflexive anthropologist exploring the intersection of where our bodies, psyches, experience meet our collective histories. Karine's current work centers around community building in a virtual community called Rooted. The heart and soul of Rooted is building an ecology of care, exploring concepts and embodied technology that serves personal and communal healing and liberation. Karine is also mentored by and works with Resmaa Menakem, author of My Grandmother's Hands, in the field of cultural somatics and somatic abolitionism, which focuses on healing the wounds caused by racialized trauma and white-bodied supremacy through the body. And a big, big welcome to one of my favorite people in the world, Karine Bell. I'm so happy to have you here, my love.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And it's really, really good to be here with y'all and to see some lovely faces on this call. And I'm really excited about this topic. I have to say, I feel like I'm wanting to bring in something that I've been kind of synthesizing in my own experience and work for quite a while now. And to really bring it in a more coherent way that we can be able to unpack and explore. So I think what I'd like to do, maybe before we do anything else, I'm going to give a little overview of what I'd like to go over today. But before that, I'd like to do a short kind of grounding and orienting practice, just to bring us all here together as present as possible. Does that sound good? Yeah? And also, I think this is also important because whatever we're doing, of course, is we have a focus on trauma. We want to do it in a trauma-informed way. And we want to remind you, I want to remind you of the agency you always have accessible to you. This is something we forget, right, in the trauma experience. If we have had a trauma history, we can forget the agency we have in this particular moment to make choices. So let's just take a moment wherever you are right now, just to, I'm not going to say to come into the body. I think we'll start by just noticing where and how your body is connecting with an object around you. So maybe it's a chair you're sitting on. Maybe it's a floor, a cushion. If you're leaning against something, maybe you can notice the support of that chair behind you. Noticing your back and your spine making contact there. Seeing if it's possible to feel the sits bones, right? You know, the bones here in the butt. Can you notice them making contact with a chair or a cushion? Maybe noticing if your feet are on the floor, can you sense that contact of the feet meeting the floor, meeting the ground beneath you? It's okay if you can't feel this fully. We're inviting in that awareness. And then what might it be like to take in a sense of support from the chair, from the sofa, from whatever you're sitting on or resting on? Maybe noticing the weight of the body resting on the chair. Maybe feeling the slight pressure of air around the body, making contact with the skin, clothing, contacting the skin. And then what might it be like to invite that awareness a little bit more internal to the body? Maybe noticing the breath, where it might animate the body. This is only an invitation, so if it feels better to stay outside the body, maybe with your awareness in your feet or elsewhere, that's also okay. I'm noticing my breath in the lower belly right now. You can do any of this with the eyes open or closed. Sometimes closing the eyes can facilitate that inward awareness. And then when you're ready, if your eyes are closed, we can open the eyes. And now what I'm going to invite you to do is to begin to slowly turn your head and neck and your eyes in one direction or the other, doesn't matter which. And you're going to start to take in the room around you. And as you're turning your head and your neck, we're going to turn the head and neck all the way around to look behind us. But as you're turning, I want you to really look at the room that you're in, noticing the objects in the room, noticing colors, textures, shapes, maybe allowing your eyes to fall on objects that you love in the space that you're in, turning all the way around, and even allowing a twist when you look behind you. Maybe you can feel the pull, so turning your hips, so the psoas muscle in the legs turns too. And look all the way around you. Look behind you when you turn. This is important for the body. We don't sometimes realize if we have any traumatic retention that we might always be living this kind of what's coming, the sort of what's coming state in this, heightened anxiety. So allowing the body to take in that in this space around you, all the way behind you, there's nothing there, right? That's threatening. So coming around the other way. And as you're turning, again, noticing the objects in the room and also noticing the windows, noticing the doors in your space. For many of us, and even for many of our ancestors, and we talk a lot about intergenerational and ancestral trauma in the trauma work that many of us do now, there may have been situations that we or they could not have left, could not have escaped from. So it's important for us to remind the body that right now in this moment, there are ways out, right? It sounds maybe very simple, but it's actually a profound acknowledgement, sort of a moment to acknowledge that we can leave, we have agency to leave this space if we need to. And now that we're here, we can come back and focus on each other. But I want to remind you as we go through this material that invitation to you is always there, right? You don't need invitation. You don't need permission. If you need to get up and maybe move the body a little bit, maybe even kind of, go out of the room for a moment, get some water, do what you need to do to take care of yourselves, okay? We're going to bring shame into this discussion, which is partly why I mentioned that. I mean, I'm not going to assume that shame is experienced for everyone the same way, but it can be a very heavy topic. But I hope to introduce something also very hopeful in this discussion today. Okay, and I have some notes, so I might look at them once in a while because I want to make sure that we stay on track and have a nice structure for us to be able to follow. But what I want to be able to do is open up this exploration with some slides that I put together, and I want to offer some context for what we're doing, for what we're talking about when we're talking about early life experiences, trauma, shame, conflict, and anti-racism work. So it sounds like a mouthful, but I hope that I will be able to give you a nice overview. After that, I want to invite us into some practice together. Does that sound good? Everyone feeling all right? Yeah? Okay. I'm glad. Nice to see you. It's really nice to see your faces. It's so wonderful. I always get that social engagement pump primed when I get to see so many faces. So, all right. Then I think we're going to go ahead. Scott, I can share my screen. Okay. Just want to make sure there's nothing else I wanted to say before I do that. All right. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, so this is really what I want to talk with you about today. I want to be able to weave in some and synthesize maybe some threads of things that I've been exploring in the work. This is really a synthesis of a lot of the different threads of work that I do. I do some focus on early life developmental trauma, which brings shame into that quite a lot. Also, I do a lot of work in the community building that I do around fostering connection and experiences of belonging. And of course, this is importantly tied to the anti-racism work and the somatic abolitionism work that I'm doing as well. So what we're really looking at here, and I think it's really important to say this because around the topic of our developing nervous system and the early life environment, this is obviously a really vast topic, and it's really beyond the scope of what we can get into in a great amount of detail. But what I want to bring in here, we live in a cultural ethos that often has a focus, it focuses highly on the individual and the individual experience. But what we need to remember is that we are highly relational, highly social beings. Our nervous systems from the time that we're born are very importantly being shaped and developed through our interaction with our parents, with our caregivers, the people around us, and also in our interaction with the world around us, right? I don't know how many people here know that when we were born, the social engagement part of the vagal complex, they call it, part of the polyvagal theory, that actually is not developed yet. We developed this ventral vagal social engagement system. That's the part of our wiring that has to do with our social relationships. That part is not fully developed when we're born. We're building it from the time that we're born in and through our interactions with our caregivers. And really this creates the blueprint. We're building the blueprint for how we navigate safety and danger and in our early experience. And this depends upon how we were responded to in those early life relationships, right? How we were responded to matters here. And we're going to get into that. So what really feels important for me to share about this is that really inherent to our early life experiences and the building of our early nervous system are these moments of what we call rupture and repair. So maybe people have heard of this idea before, but this is inherent to conflict, right? Inherent to conflict are experiences of rupture in relationship, and of course, the repair of that relationship. And these experiences of rupture and repair actually help to shape our attachment relationships and the nervous system and our nervous system. So rupture is an experience of disconnection from relationship. And I'm going to go into how that looks in a more grounded example in just a moment. But it's an experience of rupture in that sense of connection. Repair, the repair that comes on the end of the rupture, hopefully, is what actually restores the experience of connection and belonging in that relationship. So our early experiences of conflict and the rupture and repair that are inherent in that shape how we approach conflict and the range of available responses that we have in moments of conflict. And we're going to talk about that as well in just a moment. So what we're really dealing with here when we're talking about shame is we're talking about, shame is such a big topic, beautifully so. Obviously, there are really great teachers like Brene Brown who have really amplified sort of the role of at least a version of shame and how damaging it can be. We're going to add some nuance to the discussion of shame here. And some of you might be familiar with this, but I want to bring this in here. Because we are actually wired to experience shame. We have the physiology for that experience. And what that tells me is that there's a purpose that it serves. So remembering that we are actually highly social beings, right? So shame actually serves a role for us in a social way, which we're going to explore. But shame has an inhibitory effect on our physiology, meaning it immobilizes us even for just a moment, even if it's a momentary immobilization, in order to stop us from enacting a behavior that harms either ourselves or others. So shame is fundamentally a momentary experience of rupture in relationship. And that is experienced as a threat to our connection and our belonging. But this is important. It serves a purpose. So before we go any further than that, I want to just pause here for a moment because I want to actually play with inviting you into an experience of the physiology of shame, because I think this is a really interesting thing to do. And I can't stop how do I stop this share? Scott, do you know? Oh, I know what you do. There we go. All right. So we're going to go back to the slides in a moment, but would everyone be willing to do a little embodied experiment with me? Yeah? Okay, we're going to play with the physiology of shame a little bit, which I think some people, at least in an intellectual way, you kind of can imagine what we're dealing with when we're talking about shame. The image that I showed you showed this little boy with his shoulders hunched over, right? His chest kind of concave, his head sunken down. This is the posture of shame, isn't it? If you have ever been yelled at, or if you've yelled at a small child or a dog for doing something, I mean, this happens, right? These are the moments of rupture. What's the posture that is taken? It's this. It's like this. Ooh, and this has an effect of inhibition on our physiology. So I want to play with how that feels to our bodies, because I think this is a really interesting thing to do. So wherever you're sitting right now, maybe just sit in kind of in the posture you normally sit in. Maybe, you know, not too upright, not too slouched over, but just so, yeah. So starting from here, what we're going to do is we're going to slowly start to bring, we're going to bring in a phrase. We're going to bring in the sentence, I am worthy. I am worthy. But we're going to do this from two different postures. Okay. So in the first posture, we're going to take it all together. We're going to bring in the shame posture. And so we're going to start to take that on. So maybe start to roll your back forward, bringing the shoulders in, bringing the chin and head down and in a little bit. Notice already, maybe you'll notice when you say the sentence, but you can already hear it in my voice as it's kind of cut off. But rolling down kind of in that sort of sheltered, protective posture. And from this place, I want to invite you to say this out loud. I am worthy. I am worthy. And as you say that in this posture, notice the resonance in your body. Do you feel worthy when you say it in this posture? Just noticing what you notice. And then we're going to slowly start to unfold, coming back into that more neutral posture. Maybe that didn't feel so good. That's okay. Just noticing that, right? And now we're going to kind of come the other way. This time you're going to be invited to drop the shoulders down away from the ears and roll them back. Roll them back, exactly. Yeah. So allowing the chest to be open. My eyes just suddenly opened on their own and just kind of got a little bit brighter, I noticed. And now say it from here. I am worthy. I really invite you to say it out loud. I am worthy. Do you believe it from here? I believe it a whole lot more. Right? Do you notice that? Notice how the resonance of that I am worthy from this posture, how it feels. It's interesting, isn't it? Shame has a posture. You might notice people who have experienced, have this sort of chronic experience of shame. I worked with someone once many, many years ago who struggled with this posture, who couldn't, and they couldn't even really articulate why. But the expression was, I just feel guilty like this. I thought that was so interesting, right? That a dignified posture could create this guilt. So shame has a posture and it has a purpose. So let's go back because I want to explore a little bit more where we're going with that. All right, so we were here. So what we're going to introduce here is really important and relevant because we want to introduce some nuance to shame. Some of you may be familiar with this if you're familiar with trauma work, and you're especially familiar with the work of people like Karine. Kathy talks about, this is actually where I first learned about healthy versus toxic shame. And it's important because this brings in the physiology and the purpose of shame and why we don't have to fear the experience, but why we do. So there's more than one way to experience shame. There's healthy shame and there's a toxic version of shame. And depending on how we experience that shame, it will determine what responses become available to us in moments of rupture and repair and conflict. So we're going to go through the features of healthy shame first. The first of these is that the rupture experience is meant to be temporary, right? So something happens, shame comes on, it inhibits our physiology, it stops a behavior, and then we're meant to move out of it. We're not meant to stay in that experience. The second one is that the person who enacted the behavior is not the behavior. So the focus is on the behavior and not the person. The third one is that in healthy shame experiences, there is always a path back into relationship. This is the repair piece that we're talking about. There's always a path back into a relationship. It's not a permanent thing. Hold on, just want to make sure that I don't miss an opportunity to share an example. I'm going to share an example with you here of what healthy shame can look like. So I'm a parent, I'm a mother, and a lot of the work that I do around developmental trauma and early life trauma has to do with my role as a mother and breaking cycles of trauma in my parenting, right, with my children. And so this is such an interesting topic for me. And one of many examples we could pull from the world of parenting would be, let's say that a child is, a 2-3-year-old, they're just engaging in all kinds of behavior that is potentially risky to them, right? And let's say they run out into the middle of the road, and the mother sees her child run out into the middle of the road. Now she's going to probably use a very forceful, potentially even an aggressive tone to alert the child to stop, right? We don't want the child to get harmed. And sometimes if the mother is like, honey, maybe you want to consider stopping, that's not going to be as impactful as stop, right? And really, really shouting it out. Now that moment of aggression is likely to have this effect on the child's physiology of pausing them, really, because that's a rupture experience. It's like, oh, that anger is expressing a disapproval or something is not right in that moment. Now, what happens next really matters here, because of course the mother is enacting an aggressive tone, not to harm the child, but to shield the child from harm. So the child's maybe she runs out into the street and grabs the child and pulls the child back from the traffic. And in so doing, saves the child's life or a potential accident. Now, what happens next actually really matters. In the healthy shame experience, the mother is going to do what? She's likely to embrace the child and just say, honey, I was so worried about you. I hope you're okay. And that is that repair piece coming right after the rupture experience of yelling at the child to stay out of the street or to stop so it doesn't run any further into the street. That really matters for how the child then experiences that after the event. So what we're noticing in that is an entire cycle of rupture and repair. If we look at the features of toxic shame, we see something different. In the toxic shame experience, the rupture is an ongoing thing. So maybe that looks like in that scenario that I just gave you, that the child is brought back from the street and from the traffic, but instead of maybe explaining to the child why the mom yelled the way she did, Maybe she continues to go on and on and on and on about it. Maybe even, continually staying angry for a long, long period of time, even after the child is out of harm's way. The second one is that in the toxic shame experience, the person is identified with their behavior. And really consider this for a moment. How often did we experience, or maybe do we do this to others, where we were labeled, a behavior became a label? Consider the impact of behavior becoming a label. So my behavior is maybe considered to be unwanted in some way, or even potentially harmful. And instead of focusing on the behavior itself and what it might be communicating, the focus is on me. I'm bad. I become bad, or I become risky, or I become problematic, or I become whatever you want to replace that with. So that's the second one. In the third feature of toxic shame, there's no path back into relationship. The repair piece doesn't get to happen. There isn't the ability or the opportunity for the parent, let's say, the mother in that situation, to say, I did this because of this, but I love you. I love you, and we belong together. So these are more impactful than we might realize. And I would dare say that for so many people, the toxic shame experience is all too common. It's all too common in many ways. And really, this is what what I wanted to come to, because this is, for me, a feature of culture, this toxic shame experience. So when Brene Brown brings shame onto this bigger platform, what we're really talking about is toxic shame there, right? We're talking about this experience of having our identities wedded to behavior, of not having opportunities to experience repair, and having that shame experience be an ongoing thing. So many of us live with this, and this really directly impacts our ability to be with conflict and to allow shame to actually inform and direct us. If shame has a purpose, and if the purpose of shame in a healthy shame dynamic is to instruct us about the potential harm in a behavior that we or another is enacting, then in that healthy shame paradigm, we would have an opportunity to reflect when it is present. Oh, maybe there is something here for me to look at. Maybe there's something here for us collectively to look at. But when it's a toxic shame experience, it's going to be a lot harder to allow that shame to inform us, because the toxic shame is experienced in many ways as life threat. Rupture and repair, it moves us into and out of experiences of connection and disconnection, just very naturally. This is part of the experience of rupture and repair. And we learn in that movement of connection and disconnection that not only is conflict okay, but conflict can be healthy and generative. It can bring us even into deeper relationship. It can create new understandings between us. It can evolve us personally and collectively, and it can evolve our relational dynamics. So our early life experiences of rupture and repair also would really, from the level of the nervous system, would build a strong foundation and a robustness for conflict without the toxic shame. We can withstand it. I can take it if you have something that you need to say, or if there's a behavior in me that you need to point out because it's potentially causing harm. I can take that. So healthy shame, to reiterate, it really offers us moments of deep reflection. It's an important part of any maybe unhealthy dynamic, to be able to see where harmful behavior is being enacted and address it. So I wanted to bring this in here because a lot of my work is around community building. I also study community and liberation, indigenous and eco psychologies, along with somatics. And this piece for me is so, I mean, like my heart is just like almost bursting out of my chest when I see this picture, because I feel like what we're trying to do and what we're trying to work for is a more communal experience when we're looking at rupture and repair. One of the features of the sort of the more dominant cultural ethos that we live in is this hyper focus on the individual. So shame experiences, harmful behavior becomes focused on individuals. And not only does the individual often become their behavior, but the behavior becomes pathologized, right? We have a culture that often pathologizes behavior and identifies people with it. But there are traditions, there are cultures, there are places in the world that I find so inspiring in terms of how rupture and repair are dealt with. And, where, when someone in the community does something, enacts a behavior that is potentially harmful, it's actually the community bears a sense of responsibility for the healing of that person with the community. I mean, I wonder if anyone can really imagine what that might look like if we were not to kind of scapegoat people, problems in society on individuals, and rather see what is it collectively? Not that we are the ones, or certain groups are the ones enacting harm, but what if we were to bear a kind of a sense of responsibility for the creation of the environment within which healing between the community and that individual takes place? I find this absolutely inspiring to no end. I want to see if there's anything else I want to add to that, because I feel like this is a really important piece. I was reading about this recently in an article on the healing wisdom of Africa. And they were talking about a hunter who from the village kind of goes astray and starts enacting this kind of harm. They find the hunter later on, but they're enacting this kind of harmful, even aggressive behavior. But when they finally bring the hunter back into the community, they don't isolate them, they don't punish them, they don't excommunicate them, they encircle them. And they bear, like I said, they bear the sense of responsibility. How do we heal this? How do we heal this? It's something for us to explore. So I want to bring in the anti-racism piece here. And this is going to be a bit, we're going to kind of weave in some disparate threads. So I hope that this follows a nice flow. But so, by the way, when I use the term, it says BIPOC and racism, BIPOC is the term that Resmaa Menakem uses rather than BIPOC. So instead of Black, Indigenous, people of color, we use Black, Indigenous bodies of culture. It's a kind of a way of reorienting from a focus on pigmentation to a focus on people of culture, right? People who have a culture, and that's important. So toxic shame is an intrinsic part of what we call white body supremacy. White body supremacy, this is a definition that comes from Resmaa. And I think it's important to highlight this, because oftentimes when people think of white supremacy, especially if we're white bodied, then there's automatically an assumption, oh, that's for this group over there, all the way on the right, it has nothing to do with me. I don't think like that. But white body supremacy is something else. It's a philosophy woven into the cultural ethos in many parts of the world where colonialism has touched, that says that the white body is the standard by which all other bodies' humanity is measured. And I have a typo there, but this is really an important distinction to make here, because this means that it's something inherent in the cultural waters that we're all ingesting all the time, from the time we're very young. And toxic shame is an inherent part of this white body supremacy, right? White body supremacy. It's it's not a reflection of the intrinsic value of people of culture, of bodies of culture. It's only reflective of a structural hierarchy that's inherent to white body supremacy. But this has very real world effects on bodies of culture, on BIPOC bodies. And it can cause them to keep silent when racism is experienced, right? Especially when it's not spoken out loud, when it's not acknowledged and validated for as being a real experience happening. There's this thing we call racial gaslighting that happens a lot with BIPOC bodies, where they are having an experience and their experience of it is real, but it's not acknowledged, and it might even be dismissed. So BIPOC bodies might also have the behavioral impulse to soothe or to comfort or to settle white bodies when they're unsettled. And I think this is related to this idea of rupture and repair, and not wanting just to disturb the waters, not wanting to rock the boat, not wanting to potentially disrupt any modicum of connection and belonging potential there. There's also this bottling or containing of anger and rage that is a really natural part of a response to oppression that can negatively impact mental and physical health. And now here I want to say that what's really important about all the behaviors that BIPOC bodies enacted, these inhibitory behaviors are really a part of a survival intelligence. A survival intelligence. For my father, who grew up in Jim Crow South, he grew up in Mississippi, he grew up on a sharecropping farm. For him in the Jim Crow South, for anyone who's familiar with that area of the world and that period of time, it served his survival to inhibit his physiology, to embody shame. So for white bodies, with respect to anti-racism work and the dismantling of white body supremacy, which is what we're doing in somatic abolitionism, what we're doing, what we're aspiring to in any of the anti-racism work we do. Healthy shame, while healthy shame is experienced as temporary disconnection, as in the examples that we gave earlier, toxic shame, if that was the predominant experience, this can be experienced as a life threat. When toxic shame is the predominant experience, it can be experienced as life threat. No pathway back into relationship and safety, connection and belonging. And so when toxic shame is the predominant paradigm, white bodies will often do whatever they can to avoid it, right? So what behavior comes up related to this with regard to anti-racism work and white body supremacy? And I have two different examples of this. So for those who consider themselves in the work, right, who are actively doing anti-racism work, the avoidance of shame, any experience of shame, and looking at where white body supremacy still lives in their bodies, this can actually produce this kind of perfectionism, a striving for perfectionism, policing of other bodies, like, oh, you're doing this, you're doing this thing you're racist, this really pointing out where it lives in everyone else. Something we call leadification, which is part of that, which is a way of like a racial resume, like all of the work that I've done, which is also related to the virtual signaling, where we want people to see, white bodies want people to see all the anti-racism work, and also this goes into the performative gestures, not only because it matters to white bodies as well, and I fully agree that it does, but toxic shame can keep white-bodied folks who are in the anti-racism work from seeing where it still shows up in their bodies and in the subtle ways, in subtle everyday ways. And this is what I want to speak to, because it can produce certain kinds of behavior that are actually shielding from shame, and they're shielding from seeing the subtle ways that it shows up still, even for people who really care about this work. So for those who are not in the work, it can actually produce really avoidant behavior. So for anyone here on this call who's ever tried to have a conversation with someone, who said something or did something that was considered maybe racist, when it was confronted, what was the response? What was the response of the person? Were they open and receptive to looking at the behavior? Like, oh gosh, I didn't even realize, tell me more about that. How can I, start to work with that? Or was there deflecting, defending, blaming other people, and a general unwillingness to see the harmful behavior, or how and where the white body supremacy is actually being expressed in that moment? And ask yourself, why? Why? If rupture and repair in a healthy paradigm were a natural part of how we grew up, then actually it wouldn't be such a terrifying experience to look at harmful behavior, would it? Because we would know repair is on the other side of that. But not in the toxic shame dynamic. Not if that was not our experience. That when we did something, it produced, if not a permanent effect, but maybe a long-lasting one that really kind of caused us to shy away from acknowledging our shame or harmful behavior. So this can create a lifelong avoidance pattern of looking at harmful behavior. And really, this toxic shame then experience, it limits our nervous system's capacity for the charge or activation inherent in conflict. We have limited capacity in our bodies to be able to even tolerate it if what our experience is normally is one of toxic shame. And this then, of course, limits the responses that are available to us. If toxic shame has been predominant and we will do anything to avoid that experience, we are more quickly going to go into overwhelm, maybe into fight flight, that's the blaming, the defending, or into collapse. And we're cut off from our creative ways of engaging, maybe more communal, interpersonal ways of engaging, where we're really rooted in staying present to the experience and what's happening. So what can we do about this? We're coming to the question, of course, that needs to be addressed. And part of it for me is without a doubt, the creation of a culture. So I brought in this example from maybe an indigenous culture where there's more of a communal response to harmful behavior. And these are responses that are rooted in tending to the human family with fierce compassion and with radical love, not excluding anyone from the human family in moments of harmful behavior, but creating the kind of culture and the conditions in the environment for healing the individual and the communal. This is where we want to go, but we need to start first probably with our own bodies. And that will also go into the creation of the culture that's different than what we might have grown up and experienced. But we need to start to begin to disrupt the patterning that requires engagement with the body. So the patterning of going into fight or flight or going into collapse anytime we come near acknowledging harmful behavior. We need to start to build this capacity within our nervous system through embodied practices that involve what we call in the somatic world, and I can imagine maybe some people know about these, pendulation and titration. So pendulation is the ability, right? We might start with is anyone familiar with the window of tolerance that Dan Siegel talks about? It's kind of this, it's kind of this idea that we have this window of tolerance for where we can stay within like an present and embodied and engaged. But if we get tipped outside of that window, we'll go into like fight or flight or into collapse responses, more of the survival responses. And for some people who didn't have the ability to build the robustness in the nervous system to be able to deal with activation and charge that happens in moments of conflict like we're talking about here, the window of tolerance can be quite narrow, meaning it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to tip me over. So how do we broaden it? How do we begin to broaden that and create more spaciousness in the nervous system so I can stay online and stay with you to engage when something comes up that we need to address? So that's the pendulation. We move into activation and into resource and settling in the practices that we do. And we do it in what we call small dose ways. That's the titration. We do it in small doses because we don't want to tip us over too quickly. We want to be able to start with the 5-pound weight and work up from there to the 10-pound weight to the 20-pound weight, right? Without overwhelming the body. And over time, of course, this builds a lot more spaciousness in the body, and it opens us up to a broader range of possible responses. We stay connected up here with the prefrontal cortex. We stay connected with the part of us that can kind of creatively engage with this moment. Okay, what's going on here? What's happening? We can start to discern what's going on and maybe engage with the other person in a different way, not from our survival responses, which will likely cause them to tip into theirs or shut down. We can stay online and stay connected. Say, okay, let's look at this. So I would like to do a practice with everyone here, and I don't know what the time is. I'm tracking it a little bit. I'd like to do a practice right now where I'm calling touching into discomfort and touching resource. And this is exactly what I just talked about with the pendulation and the titration.